What we're going to start talking about now is culture. Now that you've understood and begun to look at your values and virtues, let's talk about the culture. My journey down this road of knowledge sharing started with this statement by Jan Carlson. I first saw it in January 1984. The challenge in most organizations is to get people to assume responsibility for making things happen. We trust our people to act responsibly. We give them the information and knowledge and rely upon them to use their values to determine how to act. Now, I spent 2 years trying to prove this statement true or false before I did anything. I found it's about 75% true, more or less. In other words, it's not a guarantee. It's not 100%. But you will get a high enough percentage of people doing the right thing and assuming responsibility that you can change your organization on the basis of it. Now that's Fred. That's our little stick man that we use to describe our associates. Because this whole exercise and this whole business of knowledge sharing is about individuals and how they're going to interact with each other. How do you release and leverage the capabilities of each individual? Knowledge can take many forms, but the principal ones that we're concerned with are either written down or between the ears and behind the eyeballs. Our experience indicates that about 90% of the knowledge in your organization is here. It's not written down. And what is typically written down is frequently out of date, almost as soon as you write it down. Therefore, if we want to be dynamic as an organization, we need to focus on this stuff, not what's written down. If you look at how knowledge is shared amongst 5 people, you have 5 primary connectors that you can consider. Please realize that this knowledge is always changing as you impinge on each other. Just as your knowledge is changing right here this morning. And it's always growing in quantity and quality. If you add in the secondary connectors that are possible between 5 people, you see a very complex knowledge-sharing environment. This shows the power of Metcalfe's law and why networked communications is more important than linear communication. The value increase that you get from a network communications is demonstrated right here. Because in addition to speed of response that you can get from a network communication model, you also get a high quality response. You do not have to run everything through an expert for validity. If you've got 5 people sharing around almost any need, or 3 people, we've found we can do it with 3, but anywhere from 3 to 5, you will get a very high quality response coming out of the process. It's almost an automatic quality control mechanism. Now, to do this stuff, we're not talking about managing knowledge. We're talking about nurturing people with knowledge. We have to tap the knowledge that exists in people's experience to satisfy the needs of the organization. This knowledge is changing every minute of every day. We have to provide benefits to each individual as they try and redefine their personal time equation of work. People will use those systems that provide them benefits in doing whatever they're trying to do. And I'll be very honest with you, if it doesn't provide those individuals with enough benefits, they won't use the system. I don't care how wonderful your IT department thinks it is. This is one reason we've tended to use very simple systems in our company. Because we've found that the more complex software that's out there today is usually non-functional when you try and distribute it broadly across an organization. People haven't got time to learn how to use all that stuff. For example, the bulk of our knowledge sharing is done in news groups under Outlook Express. Why? It's a very simple sharing system. Comes free with Outlook. Don't have to pay for it. All you got to do is turn it on. It's there. And you can have open space meetings in these news groups. And you can organize your news groups around different parts of the business. You can determine who has access to each news group. And you can actually build a very simple sharing system right in Outlook. We're starting to use Plumtree on a portal basis for teams who are working globally because we found we needed the more robustness of that software for that particular activity. But the bulk of our work is actually done in news groups. We want to leverage knowledge through networks of people who collaborate, not through networks of technology that interconnect. Interconnectivity begins with people who want to connect to accomplish something for the organization beyond the face-to-face world. Technology is the tool that makes the connections. People networks leverage knowledge through organizational pull rather than centralized information push. I don't know of any individuals in organizations today that have enough time to deal with the amount of stuff that could be pushed at them. Because we're all time compressed as individuals. So focus on satisfying a need for help in solving real problems, in real day-to-day operations, not in pushing information at your people. Think about how you might satisfy just-in-time needs and activities. Span of communication is a very interesting concept. Face-to-face, we can do it very short spans. Technology has let us increase that to the global world. So think about how you change from communicating face-to-face within departments to across the entire organization. Because if you want to be effective on a global basis, you've got to start thinking that way. By doing this, you can move the speed of response to any need towards instantaneity. And that's a key benefit that you can measure. So speed at which you can operate is a very critical outcome. As we expand an individual's span of communication through technology, you'll automatically expand their potential span of influence. And as that span of influence expands, the power of the individual expands and their value increases, both to the organization, and the individual becomes more valuable to themselves. Think in terms of giving your associates the same opportunity to expand their span of influence as if they were all promoted to CEO of the organization. Now that's scary, I know. But that's what we've done. And it works. And the reason it works is you got your value system in place. And at least 98% of everybody in your organization are trying to do the right thing. Give them the opportunity to do it. Martin, can I have that water there, please? No, yeah, that's got it. Thanks. Think about organizing around a community of one, where each individual is a community that has the freedom of an electronic break room for social interaction across the organization. One of the key elements that we found in helping us share knowledge is letting people share trivial stuff in an electronic break room. Does two things. One, it gets most of that activity in one place, and it doesn't clutter up the business side of things. And number two, they learn how to share with each other across time and space, so that when the time comes for somebody's knowledge to be shared around real business stuff, they're much more comfortable. Think about how you build trust with yourselves face to face. You do it by sharing trivial stuff first. If you want to build communities across time and space, you've got to let the people play. We give all of our people full access to the internet except for the pornography and the gambling sites. Those are the only two we restrict. Because we want them comfortable building relationships across time and space. Because this is what we're doing. We're building new communities in a new setting, an electronic setting. We've got to move from hoarding knowledge to gain power to sharing knowledge to gain power. If I hired a PhD tomorrow and they didn't share anything they knew with anybody else, their value would be zero. So if you've got people who don't want to share, their value is not near as high as those who do want to share. The proactive sharing of knowledge is directly proportional to the level of trust that exists in your organization. I'll give you an example. I've done some work with a seminary in the United States. And I can assure you, their ability to share is several times greater than most corporations today who are trying to meet next quarter's numbers. Much greater. The level of trust is radically different. So think about the values that your people believe in. Are they real, or are they just nice words on the wall? Do you run your organization on the basis of those values or not? Now, you're not going to get there from the direction of the IT department. I hate to say it, because you're dealing with culture change at this point. And it's got to be led by those that are in command, not the IT department. So if you're throwing the monkey on the IT department's back, you're actually doing everybody a disservice. Management cannot avoid the responsibility of culture change. Think about all the techies in your organization. I know some of you have a lot of techies in your organization, but generally speaking, almost any new software that you put out there, about 20% of the organization will grab it pretty quickly and play with it. But worry about the other 80%. How do you get up to critical mass to where you can really use the power of software? You're going to find that the simpler the software is, the more likely it is to be used. You use very complex software, you can have some problems. Now, we're going to Plumtree to do some real serious knowledge sharing and support some teamwork. And we're finding that we're having to teach a lot about how to use portal software and how to use Plumtree. A lot more than we thought we would in the beginning. Everybody has 24 hours a day. That's what God gives us. If people are going to use a system, it's going to be based on the amount of value that they believe they get out of using that system. So if you want increased productivity from your people, pay attention to how much value the people get out of it relative to the time they have to spend on it. And you'll find that the more value that you can provide relative to the time they have to spend, and I'm talking about value to the individual, as far as it being useful to them in doing what they're trying to do, you'll get the high usage. Otherwise, you won't. Now, I've got a few characteristics here I'll give you. This is what I did when I was flat on my back for 2 weeks in 89 or 88 or whenever it was. Somewhere in there. First characteristic is reduce the number of transmissions of knowledge to one to achieve the least distortion of that knowledge. How many have played, we have a game in the States we call Post Office, where you sit and pass information from one person to another and around the table, and it comes back, and it's always distorted. Same thing happens in organizations that have sequential flows of information and knowledge, where you acquire information on the front line and send it to your boss, and then he modifies it and sends it on to his boss, and it goes up about 4 or 5 layers, and then some guru somewhere says, oh, this is wonderful, and he puts his infinite wisdom on it, and next thing you know, it comes back. And it's not even recognized on the front line anymore for what started out. This is one of the problems that we have in command and control structures on communication. I've been a CEO, and I can tell you, A lot of times, by the time the information got to me, it was almost unintelligible. And when I dug back down, I found out the real situation. So the more you can have networked communication across an organization, the better. Since the greatest knowledge base in the company is in the heads of the individual associates of the company, we have to give everyone access to everyone else in the company across the organizational barriers to communication. We have to go across the structural silos of the organization. Now that's going to scare a bunch of people right there. This is even worse. Since each individual is part of the knowledge base of the company, all associates should have equal rights to enter knowledge into the system without prior filtration by management or experts. We want to get our people to share their knowledge with each other. If you're going to have to pass it through management first, or have to pass it by an expert first before you can do it, nobody cares about your knowledge. One thing we've found is that the expert is not always known, particularly if you've got fast-changing situations. The expert is moving around the organization, depending on who has the latest and greatest knowledge. So don't think you always know who the expert is. Now these individuals, if you create the culture of knowledge sharing, will identify themselves as an expert when they volunteer to share their knowledge. This may sound simple, but it's true. It's got to function across time and space with the knowledge base available 24 hours a day. We have to give them the hardware and software that will allow them to connect at any time, anywhere. As individuals, we do our best work at either early in the morning or late at night. How many are morning people in this room? How many are night people? Okay. We've found that laptops are 2 to 4 times more valuable on an economic return basis than desktops, because laptops are available whenever you want to turn on your knowledge. Desktops are physically tied to when you're in the office. So we don't use desktops in our company, or very few actually. Look at things on an economic return basis, not on the basis of cost. Because sometimes what you save in one area actually inhibits your ability to function as an organization. Keep it simple. Think in terms of software that's designed for the public, that is easy to use, rather than software that's written by techies for techies. And I think a lot of you know what I'm talking about. If you're operating on a global basis, we all learn best in our native language, whatever it is. The ideal system would be one where everything on my PC was in my language. And anything I sent to someone else would be automatically translated by the system into the language of the recipient. We haven't achieved that yet. But I have a feeling that's one barrier that's going to get jumped at some point in the future. Because it all boils down to this. The sharing of the tacit knowledge by the users will generate the information to update the explicit knowledge of the company. Give you an idea of just how we do it. Somebody will start a threaded discussion in a news group, like in our pulp and paper section. And that discussion will continue until it's over, until that individual who started it decides he's got what he needs. And then the group disbands. So it's a true virtual open space meeting. If the results are very good or bring new knowledge to the equation, we will capture that threaded discussion electronically and then put it right straight into a full text searchable knowledge base. We do not use taxonomies. I know there are a lot of folks in Europe that think taxonomies are God's gift to creation, but we've never found much use for them. Now, I will admit, there are some folks starting to use them in some areas now. But you'll find that the production, I'll go into this taxonomy issue a little bit later. I don't want to get stuck on it now. But the result of the process of sharing is what we will then put in our explicit knowledge base. It's full text searchable. We found it much more efficient. We could cut the time from generation to use radically by not going through the taxonomy approach. If you get a discussion finished and you know it's good stuff, you grab it, you put it in the knowledge base that's immediately available when you take the full text search approach. This is probably the best definition of knowledge sharing I've ever heard. Individually, we're all vulnerable to being beaten. Collectively, collaborating together, we can win in any situation. We need to focus on the importance of harnessing the minds that are in our organizations to meet our needs anytime, anywhere. It's the most powerful weapon you have available in the competitive arena today.